there's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is Content Farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world.
Ајде, мајката!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
The coronavirus continues to rage across Macedonia, and as these words are spoken, over 4,000 Macedonians have perished because of the virus. Another 135,000 Macedonians have had the virus, meaning that far more Macedonians had the virus or have died from the virus than have been vaccinated. And the few who have been vaccinated in Serbia. And yet, Zoran Zaev and his health minister, Vinko Filipče, act as if none of this is their responsibility or fault. Recently, the pair went out joyriding on their motorcycles, and then a few days later they took a helicopter to Prilep, when they could have driven, raising a great deal of justified criticism from the public. And we have just learned that a shepherd near Kratovo, who was tending his flocks in a remote village in the countryside, suffered an aneurysm, was denied an emergency flight out of the region by helicopter, and subsequently died. In the meantime, new curfews go into place as we record, including 2 weeks of 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. mandatory stay-at-home orders, and the closing of all restaurants, cafes, bars, gyms, and other businesses. Bulgaria had elections the other day. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin and Jason in Skopje, Macedonia.
Yes, and today we're recording this, I think, on Tuesday, April 6th, episode 109 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. It'll drop tomorrow, Wednesday, and unfortunately the death toll will go up as well tomorrow. But today, I think we were just talking before we started recording, Cvetin, that the numbers yesterday were just hovering right under 4,000. So with today's numbers, which will come in later today, indeed, over 4,000 Macedonians will have perished from the virus. And it just seems to be raging across Macedonia. I don't know if this is the original, quote-unquote, China virus or the variants or whatever, but to me it seems, looking at this from afar, tell me if I'm wrong, but it just seems that the government has completely just given up, thrown their arms up in the air and said, if you want to go to Serbia, good luck. Go to Serbia and get vaccinated. Yeah. Although I saw the news today that they're using the Boris Strakovski Sports Hall to actually start vaccinations. But how many doses do they actually have in country right now? Rough back of the envelope guess.
There were some 10,000 people who got vaccinated in Serbia, and then it stopped. I think the Serbs used up, they had a huge batch of AstraZeneca, which was about to expire, so they opened the borders. They used it up now, but they're still receiving large new quantities of Chinese Pfizer vaccines. They're overflowing with vaccines. So at the moment, there is no organized transport to Serbia, but there is some initial vaccination in Macedonia. So last week, the government finally received some AstraZeneca through the COVAX mechanism, I think 24,000. And Serbia donated 20,000 Sputnik vaccines. So basically, they figured they faced some criticism at home. People were saying, okay, why are we having Macedonians come over and, they can bring the virus and standing in line and have our doctors vaccinate them, just give them the vaccines and they can do what they want with it. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, Zaev has about 45,000 vaccines. I think some more Sputnik arrived independently, not through Serbia. So let's say about 50,000.
That's 25,000 people.
Well, if they're expecting more to come from the unused, unwanted AstraZeneca from across the world, and it's 3 months, it's enough time to, line up more vaccines. So they could, I suppose, just use up all the AstraZeneca they have right now. So 25,000 people, 24,000 vaccinated with the first shot, and then hope that they will be able to find the second dose in the future. As for the Sputniks, I don't know. So 20,000 Sputniks, whether they will try to reserve a second dose for the people who received the first dose, or just shoot another 20,000 people with Sputniks and then hope for the best that they'll be able to provide for a second dose. I mean, so yeah, between 30,000 and up to 50,000 people will be vaccinated in the coming days, and they're vaccinating about 3,000 people a day. So initially, it's doctors. They still haven't covered all the doctors because so far before this there were only like 11,000 vaccines before the larger quantities arrived last week. It took them. They were supposed to start vaccinating on Wednesday. They only started on Monday this week. But yeah, 3,000 a day. So far, no major issues. People are saying it's reasonably functional, accessible. It's doctors, police, and the military. Right. There is because the level of trust in the government is so low, so that I think that this is also playing a role, and the trust in AstraZeneca is also low. So at the moment, they're kind of like ordering the police and the military to show up, and people are in a wait-and-see mode. There were 2 people who collapsed yesterday because of, they say even before the vaccine, it's like panic attacks and stuff like that. But a lot of folks are in wait-and-see mode. There's offers coming through trades association. Even the journalists, we are not very, useful, and I doubt many people will mourn us. But even we are being offered, repeatedly actually, come and get vaccinated. And
Cvetin, you're very useful. So you provide a public service. So.
Yeah, exactly. poor public relying on my services. I pity the public. But it's becoming now even, we're coming to another, curious that people were eager to go to Serbia and get vaccinated. They kind of like trust them. And now that it's offered here, it's more like, okay, let's have the army, the police, and let's test it on the journalists first. And then if they survive, we'll give it to the general, honest population.
Yeah. Well, I just did a quick back of the envelope calculation here. So just assume that there's 1.3 million adults in Macedonia over the age of 18. So we know it's not 2 million. There's going to be a census until the fall. Another subject we might discuss. Take out the children under 18. So just say 1.3 million divided by 3,000 shots a day. That's still 433 days. And the last time I checked, there were still 365 days in a year. So something's going to have to change there. Either they're going to have to up those numbers, or that's it. They're going to have to up those numbers. So we're currently doing about 3 million shots a day in the United States. So in a half day we could have the entire population of Macedonia shot or jabbed, I should say. Yeah.
Can we come over?
Yeah, sure. Come on over. So yes, it's vaccination. What is it called? Vaccination vacation or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
this would be equivalent to vaccinating 20,000 people a day. I mean, and even if we had the staff to do this, we don't have the vaccines at the moment, and I doubt we'll have it soon. We're lining up some Chinese stuff. There's the Chinese defense minister here. That should be, they're the only ones offering like a larger quantity for countries like us, like 500,000 or 200,000, stuff like that. But, Zaev botched this badly when apparently they tried to take a percentage of the sales. They tried to route the sales through this shell company in American Samoa, and it all collapsed. So this would have been, like a proper amount of vaccines, and people would be eager to take the Sputnik or the Chinese stuff. They kind of distrust AstraZeneca at the moment. They broadly distrust the West, but they're told that Pfizer is a good vaccine. So I suppose people would be happy to take a Pfizer, but we'll see now. We have the AstraZeneca from the Western assortiment, and it will be difficult.
Yeah, the AstraZeneca one obviously got a bad rap in Europe as a whole because of the blood clot issue. Pfizer, I hear, very good. I got Moderna. My first shot, my second shot scheduled for late April. which is why you still can't see me. I'm invisible. No, seriously, no side effects whatsoever. And it really, honestly, it depends on the individual. You've seen healthy young adults. A friend of mine who's a police officer here in Tucson, mid 30s, I think, just in real top shape, had a really negative reaction to the second shot. But that's, as I understand it, because I've read a little bit about it, because they're younger people that have a much healthier immune system, which on the second shot is working harder to fight it or something like that. I'm messing this up, I'm sure, but there's a medical explanation for it, is my point. But anyway, I don't think people should be afraid of any of the shots, whether they're Russian, Chinese, Western capitalist pig, or anything like that. So, but the issue here is not that. The issue is the incompetence of the government, as you've just gone through, failing long ago to line up contracts with various companies and other things, and relying entirely on the goodwill of the European Union. And as I recall, Zaev, I think in 2 consecutive days, the first day he blamed NATO and the second day he blamed the European Union for failure to get vaccines into Macedonia. So, and then, on top of this, I just mentioned, it's kind of like they've thrown their arms up in the air as they're riding their motorcycles. Zaev and Filipche, go joyriding when this is I would think it's a national crisis. And they should be working 24/7, which was a slogan from the previous government, working 24/7 for you, to get this done. And then fill me in on the details of their helicopter ride to Prilep. Why did they go to Prilep in the first place?
I mean, you know how it happens. They do so many crimes together. Like we have this Chinese, kickback from the vaccine deal. We have Filipche building an entire residential complex, a number of buildings in Skopje, which is impossible on his salary. Zaev with racketeering and God knows what else. And they will always fall on the tiniest things. So in another country, it would be normal for the executive to take a helicopter to, if they're really in a hurry over something. But and Zaev and Filipche went to Prilep, kind of like inspect the construction of a field hospital there for COVID patients and other, like how the local hospital is handling the COVID cases, which is a separate crime. Zaev's former deputy prime minister, Kocha and Yushev, got the contracts to build the field hospitals. So that's another, they're making profit out of the crisis left and right. And people were outraged when they saw the two, instead of driving to Prilep, which is a difficult drive. Part of it is along the highway, part of it is along a very difficult terrain, rugged terrain, and then
I've done that drive many, many times. It's fine.
Well,
especially when you have a police escort.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, we had a project to bypass this most difficult section from the highway to Plitvar with a Spanish company. They were hired. They were working on the project, and then when Zaev's government came, the deal collapsed. And knowing what we know about Zaev now, how he treated the Chinese companies building highways, it's very likely that he tried to extort money from them, because we had a German company abandon the railway construction to Kriva Palanka, which is very important now with Bulgarian relations. The way they are, this would be the railway link to Bulgaria. The Spanish company abandoning this project to link Prilep and Bitola with Prilep, the whole Pelagonia region, to the Alexander the Great Highway, which is important for those people to get to Skopje. And we had the Chinese practically give up on the highway Kichev-Ohrid after obvious extortion attempts against them. And the government, especially the Albanian part, are now in talks with Bechtel about, we'll give them all the highways that were left unfinished by Gruevski, so practically we'll pay them double, 3 times more than the Chinese or the Spaniards would collect for this deal. So long story short, we don't have a proper road to Prilep, but we would have had if it weren't for Zav. By now, this would have been a proper free-lane expressway, with near highway quality of driving. So Zav took a helicopter, so he doesn't drive along the decrepit road, which is decrepit due to his fault. It's actually been made worse by construction along the road but the construction would have been finished by now. And people exploded. There was outrage about this, especially given his track record of taking Filipče on motorcycle joyrides or all-terrain vehicles, driving across mountains. And afterwards, this other disaster happened when a person who actually needed a helicopter for evacuation in a very remote village near Kratovo, a shepherd had a stroke, he collapsed. His mother tried to keep him warm in the snow for the entire night until a medical team came in the morning. But the medical team had to abandon the jeep and walk for hours to the house, and then they would call the police, the firemen, the town hall in Kratovo, whoever they could think of, and nobody came to their assistance. They said the mayor wouldn't pick up the phone. The crisis center, which is supposed to organize the evacuation with helicopters, said no. And eventually they did like in World War II, they fashioned like a few sticks and blankets, like a gurney, put the man on the gurney. They didn't even have a horse. So they had to carry him for 5 hours on foot across a stream, across mountains, until they reached the jeep where they left it, where they could, the furthest point where they could drive to the house, and then, drive through the mountains and take him to the Stip hospital, where the man unfortunately died after all the injuries he sustained and, delayed help. And Zaev is now, even Dimitrov and Pendarovsky, Pendarovsky mainly to cover his ass because the military has helicopters and is supposed to make them available for these cases, and he runs the military. But they even, criticized the government because, the prime minister is out there getting his rock on while, people are dying because they never use the helicopter to transport a corona patient, and now this happens after the scandal in Prilep.
That is so sad. Wow. And this government has proved itself incompetent, corrupt, on top of the fact that it has given away Macedonia's name, identity, culture, history, heritage, and so much more. And yet it's still standing barely, in my opinion. And yet something like this, a small, what we might consider a small event in a very remote place, could be the one thing that finally puts everybody over the edge, and they say enough. And I don't know the name of the shepherd. I hope we learn the name.
It hasn't been released.
Okay, well, I hope we learn the name of the shepherd and a little bit more about his family, and condolences to his mother and his family, of course. But it's little things like that we've seen in throughout history in countries around the world that finally, wake people up out of their dull torpor and say, enough. This is just enough. Dosta. So we will see on that. But I guess if there's any good news in this, and I'm not going to give credit to the government certainly for it, but the fact that the vaccines are coming in, people are starting to get vaccinated on a more normal, regular schedule, organized perhaps I should say. But as you point out, they're going to have to do more than 3,000 shots a day.
Yeah.
Summer's coming up. People want to travel. I think is Greece opening up?
There is some talk that
Southern
they
Macedonia?
might open for. Yeah. There is some talk they might open for if you have a test or a vaccine. But I don't think they want to go a second year without the tourists, even though we're not the highest spending tourists.
No. Greece, Spain, Portugal, Croatia, even Albania, Montenegro. All these places that have waterfront can't go a second summer without tourists. it's 10 to 20% of their economy, depending on the country, relies on tourism. So
Yeah.
so and frankly, Macedonia, I remember looking at the numbers pre-coronavirus of the number
Yep.
of tourists coming in, and regardless of who the government was, people just kept coming into Macedonia, especially during the summer months.
Yep.
Macedonia is 80% of the country is mountains and hills, and you throw in the lakes and the wine country and so many other places that people want to visit, not just from the region, but from around the world. And tourism, I think, is a growing part of Macedonia's economy. And you
It was.
yeah, true. Yeah, well, you can't keep shut down for another summer. So
Yeah. But imagine if it was up to the government, we would have been now like 6 days inside the census. So we would have had people going from house to house and spreading the virus. The numbers are horrific. Like we had 50 deaths last week, then 45 the next day. Right now it's around 30 deaths a day. And this comes after the SDSM party held a mass vote in person, like 60,000 of their drones were gathered in schools, and they voted for Zaev. And then this definitely contributed to the spread. And then they kept all the restaurants and cafes open because Zaev wanted to have a sense of normalcy, because he had promised the Albanians a corona census under which Macedonians would boycott abroad and probably boycott at home as well, trying to avoid getting infected by teams of people coming to their home and then going to another home and then another and then another in the same day, while the Albanians are being massively counted on the online census. So there was going to be like a huge inflation of Albanians counted in the census. This was Zaev's promise to the Albanian parties, and he was going to go ahead with this. Mickovski, the VMRO leader, only talked him out of this after he threatened a boycott of the census just like days before it started. And just imagine what would have happened now with these numbers, with this death rate, if we even had this massive operation in place. With the census cancelled, only afterwards the government said, okay, now we'll do the sensible thing and we're going to close down restaurants and cafes. They close down tomorrow for 2 weeks at least initially. We have a longer curfew. It's going to start at 8 in the evening. Starting from today, it started at 10 in the evening in previous days. And Zaev is trying to get out of his own culpability. So he said, well, Gruevski also used the helicopter several times, and Gruevski then responded shortly on Facebook, I never did. Then he said, no, it's cheaper to fly to Prilep than take a motorcade, which is, on stilts. Then he said, then they have older people now on Twitter, on Facebook, commenting, it's not Zaev's fault, it's all these irresponsible people going out in restaurants and cafes. And especially today that it has been announced that they're going to close the cafes tomorrow, so everybody's now going for a drink. But so they're trying to, respond to the mounting criticism. But as you said, it's going to be it's a lot of pent-up anger. It's going to be some stupid thing like Zaev going on a helicopter ride that's going to explode at some point. And hopefully this is it now.
Yeah, well, the left there and the left here, the left all around the world shares many of the same traits, one of which is, of course, blaming everybody but themselves for the disasters which befall them. So I'm not surprised to see the colorful revolutionaries blaming the public. Always somebody else's fault. So 2 weeks of these new curfews, semi-lockdowns. Easter, Orthodox Easter is May 2nd. Ramadan begins on Monday, I believe, but Ramadan goes for a month. So these lockdowns are going to affect Ramadan for sure. Easter is still what? Let's see, that's over 3 weeks away. So that's
If the Ramadan worshippers respect the curfew, which they didn't last time.
Well, it's interesting because last year, I think, all of Macedonia was shut down for like 4 or 5 days over Easter weekend, and Ramadan was not shut down. So this year it's opposite.
There was a ban during the Ramadan for house gatherings,
Right.
but the Albanians, the Muslim community, they completely ignored it. And
Yeah.
this was our first spike, actually. This was the first time we really had serious spike in cases during and after Ramadan. And then afterwards, we had the autumn spike, and now this third wave, as it's called.
Right. Well, and of course the lockdown enthusiasts, they will continue to claim anything just to keep this situation going, because for a lot of them, they've received a lot of, and a lot of these are public health officials. I'm thinking specifically if you're in the States, and think tankers and others that they're constantly on the news, and they like it. It gives them a sense of power and importance, because otherwise nobody would know who they are. So they're very reluctant to give that up. So there's always going to be a fourth wave, a fifth wave, a sixth wave, a double mutant virus from another country. I read the other day there's actually an Arizona variant now. So
really,
I saw it in a couple of places and then ignored it after that. So
is it IPA or?
No, IPAs are enjoyed throughout the country and across the world.
I mean, I don't know what to say anymore with this branding of the virus.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, okay. Well, we'll continue on. So we didn't talk about this before getting on the phone here. The census, when we recorded the other week, it wasn't officially canceled, or postponed, I should say. Yeah. And you mentioned it was canceled. It's actually postponed until September, I believe. And then the local elections are pushed back from September into October. But have they resolved the issue of? So, for listeners, just a quick recap: the Zaev government was counting heads outside of Macedonia, and this is where Bujor Osmani, Artan Grubi, Alehmeti, and others were, running around to Kosovo, Albania, Switzerland, other places where large numbers of Macedonian Albanians reside, and saying, you got to register for the census, even though they don't live in the country. A census, and I actually went back, I might even write an article about this, because I went back and I did some research for the EU and, Eurostat, etc., some of their guidelines for conducting a census. And as Christian Miskowski said, the first 3 lines of that, I don't know if it's law or guidance or what it was exactly, but I'll go back and look, clearly states that the whole point of the census is to count the number of heads in the country on a given, within a defined period of time. You don't count the number of heads outside of the country, even if they're citizens. And so has that changed? Or is that still going to happen? Or do we know?
It's unclear.
Okay.
So it was not resolved as an issue during the meeting between Zaev and Mickoski. It's unlikely that so Vimera did not. There was a vote for a new law for the census, but it only postponed the census till September. It did not change the methodology of the census.
Okay.
But now Mickoski is saying that it can be changed with a bylaw, like at the level of the census committee, and. At this point, the agreement is that the diaspora continues to be counted until September, which would leave time for Vimera to start some kind of like a positive reinforcement campaign with the Macedonian diaspora to also register. They were largely boycotting the whole thing. And the 2 other positions from Vimera are these, that the diaspora will be put on a separate list. So Mickoski is using the term they're being evidented but not counted in the census. So there will be a list. We already have a list of all Macedonian citizens, but let's say, okay, we're updating this list, but it will be put to one side, and then the number of actual residents in line with European census standards, which you mentioned, is going to be the list which we get from in-person canvassing in September. So this is one thing, and the other is that there's going to be like a strict distinction of people who moved a year ago, up to a year ago, and people who moved for a longer period of time. And the second category is not going to be counted. Like serious long-term immigrants are not going to be counted, only those who recently left the country and could reasonably be expected to return. So even in this evidence of the census, so this is what Vimmer is saying. Obviously, Albanian parties reject this. There is a lot of heated rhetoric between Vimmer and the Albanian parties at the moment. Mickovski even went to an Albanian television and was pretty harsh on the issue.
Good.
Yeah, it was a really tough interview. So we'll see now if part of the deal is to have Vimmer accept the results and be part of the process, which the U.S. requested, Matthew Palmer, which we discussed, and the U.S. ambassador, then it's probably going to include, Vimmer accepting the final results, and this would need to be included somehow in the census, in the work of the Census Committee. There is already a deputy director of the State Statistics Bureau who is an Albanian, which practically gives Albanians veto power over the process. The next logical step would be to give a Vimmer official also veto power over the process, and in exchange for Vimmer accepting the results. But we'll see. We'll see how it develops until September.
Okay, that's a good update. Yeah, and Cvetin, I'm convinced more and more, especially as I look at, without getting into a great deal of discussion about fighting against the woke progressive left here in America on certain issues. And it's the same there, although you're not necessarily fighting against woke progressive lefties, although you are in some quarters. But when it comes to the insistent, shrill, and wrong-headed demands of Macedonia's ethnic Albanian leadership, I do believe that Vomero and others should really push back and fight back. And I have to applaud Christian for going on an Albanian TV station and saying what needs to be said, and that is that this is the way it is supposed to work, and it doesn't matter what you say. If we're going to truly be European, as everybody keeps talking about, and eventually part of the European Union, then these are the guidelines that we need to follow, and this is how it's done in the European Union and in EU countries. And so we all know that the reason that Macedonia's ethnic Albanian leadership wants this is because it's all about power. Ultimately, it's not about the actual legitimate needs of their constituency, which is for jobs, education, healthcare, infrastructure. The same thing that everybody in Macedonia needs and wants. For them, it's other issues. So, but
we'll see how the embassy decides eventually. I mean, our last episode we covered this at length.
Yeah.
They now accepted that census is postponed, and they asked that Vimmer joins the parliament, helps ZAF provide the quorum for some key bills, such as the latest stimulus package. So we give money to companies who were shuttered because of the COVID. Vimmer was willing to do this even before, but they said only this and no other laws.
Right.
Now a few other bills will also be put in motion as part of this agreement, but the embassy agreed that the census is postponed. They even worked with the Albanian parties who didn't want this to happen to persuade them to postpone it until September. We'll see. It's they're playing something. They're up to something, but we'll see how.
Yeah. They always are. Well, let's move on to Bulgaria briefly. They just had their elections on Sunday. Again, we're recording this on Tuesday the 6th. They had their elections on Sunday the 4th. Bad news for Prime Minister Boyko Borisov and his party, which dropped down to, I think they got about 25%, whereas in the 2017 elections they had around 33, 34, I think. So they lost a significant amount. There's a couple of new parties, names I can't remember, but an important outcome of these elections is that the absolutely, entirely loathsome Krasimir Karakachanov and his party did not make the threshold of 4%, as I understand it. So they are not going to be in the next parliament.
Yeah, they're out.
Good. And of course, his deputy in the party was, what's the other loathsome freak?
Jovake, but he's
Yeah.
a member of the European Parliament, so
That's right.
his office is safe for now.
Yeah, that's right. He's an MEP. But there's another one, Andrei.
I don't know, Kovachev, he's from Gerb. He's from Borisov's party.
He's from Gerb. Okay, all right.
Yeah, he's very
Okay.
outspoken, very loud on this issue. But,
That's right. So he's still around.
Yeah,
Or
he is.
will be.
Yeah.
Probably.
He's also an MEP as well.
Okay. All right. I'm getting my MEPs and my MPs mixed up.
Yeah.
I'm not from a parliamentary democracy. I should know this stuff. So anyway.
They're
but-
like our senators.
Right. But Karakachanov is out. But even so, of course, I think he said something on Facebook or somewhere saying that he's still going to be around, and he's still going to be bringing up the issue, etc. But as I understand it, Borisov put out a Facebook post saying essentially, look, my party still got the greatest number of votes. I'm respected amongst the international community. Take a few days, think about it, and then let's all come together and do what's best for Bulgaria, essentially. Meaning, he was trying to spin it into a victory. But what are the analysts in Macedonia saying out loud about these elections?
Well, Borisov and the socialists lost votes
Right,
a lot.
good point.
Borisov lost about, I think he had 95, now he's down to 60 something, below 70. And the socialists, they were cut in half. They had like 80, now they're down to 45.
Wow.
And they all lost votes to protest parties. Like there is one TV show personality, Slavi Trifonov, who made a party called Ima Takav Narod. There is such people, which is
What a
now the
great
second
name.
largest party. And it's now the second largest party in the country.
Wow.
And there is two parties which came out of these protests, which were held against Borisov last year. So they have like 15 seats in parliament. And there is the Turkish party, of course. So
Right.
it's like, six-way split. And Borisov immediately offered everybody to come on board to form a government of experts and fight the crisis. He's closely following Macedonian developments, and we've noticed this in the past, and this is like one of the options discussed in Macedonia after the elections. And instead of trying to get the Turks and giving them major concessions, and maybe some of these protest parties or the socialists, he's saying which is the way Zaev opted for. He's saying no, let's get everybody on board. And the socialists immediately said, no, we're having everybody except Borisov and the Turks, and we can kick them out, kick Borisov out of government. And they're offering Trifonov as the nominal second, as the winner in the opposition, from the opposition camp, to lead this government. So this is the socialists enticing Trifonov to do this. And from our perspective, okay, we lost the most outspoken person who was blocking Macedonia, who was being hardline on the Macedonian issue, even though recently he was cooperating with Zaev very closely. Remember this incident where Karakachanov falsely claimed that he has a list of VMR officials who have Bulgarian citizenship, which is direct cooperation between the two. So he's now out of parliament, but Trifonov is also, who is now the main person, the main winner of these elections. He's also been very vocal in the past about, he would sing Macedonian songs in his show, and then he would say, which is great, don't get me wrong, but then he would say, like, he would pick up some instance of social media insult against Bulgaria, and he would make a huge case out of this, and he would make a big deal out of Macedonians taking Bulgarian passports. So, yeah, he wouldn't necessarily be a softer line on Macedonia, and now Bulgaria has to make a positive decision to withdraw, to lift its veto at the next European Council, they might not have a government. Borisov might still be in some caretaker position until then. They might be locked in difficult negotiations. I don't know if this helps or not, opening the accession talks for Macedonia.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it doesn't help. It's going to continue to be muddled. They're still going, Bulgaria, no matter what kind of government they form, are still going to be holding their veto, for lack of a better word, over Macedonia. Of course, that brings in the question then of what do you do with Albania? Because they're waiting as well. And various politicians and pundits and others throughout the European Union have said Albania should come in with Macedonia, Albania should go ahead of Macedonia, etc., etc. So we'll just kind of continue to monitor that and see what happens. Send me this guy's Twitter handle so I can troll him.
Trifonov, I haven't seen him on Twitter. I'm not sure if he's
That's too bad.
out there.
All right.
Jovano, Jovanke, kraj vardaro sediš, mori belo platno beliš, se na gore gledaš dušo, srce moje Jovano. Kraj Vardaro sediš, mori belo platno beliš, se na gore gledaš dušo, srce moje Jovano.
Okay, so this was Slavi Trifonov, practically the new power behind the throne in Bulgaria, the person who would likely decide who forms the next government, performing a classic Macedonian song. But we also had another major cultural event since our last episode, and this is all of a sudden, listen, we're a football superpower. Who knew?
And this is our farmer's pick for this week, Cvetin. The headline, frankly, is Macedonia defeats Germany in football. For our American listeners, that means in soccer. But on March 31, Macedonia and Germany played in a World Cup qualifier. I think they're in Group J. And it's worth pointing out that Germany is a 4-time World Cup champion. Macedonia defeated Germany 2-1 in the Germans' home court in I can't remember where it was. Duisburg, Germany. No spectators due to COVID, but still, this was a major event for Macedonia, celebrated by Macedonians around the world. And apparently, it's only the second time that Germany's suffered a qualifying defeat since 1985. The first was in 2001 when they lost to England 5-1. So, and you were there. Obviously, you were in Macedonia when this happened. How did people celebrate? Given
We
the
didn't
lockdown,
because we were under police curfew. And traditionally, everybody goes out and we drive to the German embassy. To the embassy of the victim country, and
Embassy of the
across
loser.
city. And then everybody descends in the main square and in front of the Alexander the Great statue. Zaev messed up the last time we had cause for such celebration with Vardar winning the European Cup. Zaev practically messed up, the return of the team. So we were denied the welcoming ceremony through the Macedonia Gate. The government is very careful not to have too many outbursts of national pride where inevitably people chant "Fuck North Macedonia," "Fuck North," always Macedonia. But you could hear shouting from apartments. The buildings were shaking, and it was great. It was a great event, and we were actually the better team because the Germans only scored through a penalty, and we were denied a clear penalty. So it was, the referee was completely on their side, and our guys still managed to score twice. And there was another misfortune for the Germans. one of their players missed like an open goal. But again, with the penalties, we were easily they had more of the possession. Obviously, I mean it's still Germany, but in a sense, we were at least the as good team, if not the better team, than they were. So it's a huge boost of national pride ahead of the European Championship in a few months, where we qualified for the first time ever. And yeah, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
Huge deal, yeah. And I think so. The captain of the Macedonian team is Goran Pandev, and he scored one of the two goals, correct?
Yeah,
he scored one of the two goals. I thought that was an interesting point that he is, according to Professor Wikipedia, he is Macedonia's all-time top scorer with 37 goals. He's also 37 years old. Yeah. And who scored the other goal?
Bardi.
Okay, all right.
He's a Turkish player.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that is just something to be enormously proud of. Saw Twitter explode, and so our congratulations to the Macedonian national football team and to Macedonians around the world.
And in the European Championship, we get to face the Netherlands, like against serious teams. So it's going to be fun.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to that. Yeah. All right. Good talking with you, Cvetin.
Yeah, you too, buddy. Take care.